All right, we are live. Coach Doug's here with it. So we have the collectible guru, but on Twitter you are Eric at Eric Whiteback.
That is correct. Yeah.
Perfect. So you posted a thread today, very detailed thread, got a lot of traction. A lot of people in the card hobby are talking about it, and it's something that I've wanted to talk about for a while, but I'm not good at math, and I didn't have the stats to go with it. You did the homework, you put in the work and everything. You had this really great thread, and we'll include it here in the blog and everything. But basically, there are breakers in the card hobby where an individual can buy into a spot, and the breaker will basically sell cards or sell spots in the break where they open cards. And if you bought a team or a division in that break, if that card matches that, that card belongs to you. There are some breakers that seem to get all the luck. And there's a certain breaker, Backyard Breaks, down in South Florida, and they continually get major hit. And questions arise: how are they hitting so many cards? Yeah. Some people say, hey, they open a lot of cards, and so it's if you're opening a lot of product, there's a chance you're going to get a lot of hits, and there is something to that. But you broke it down for us. You put some numbers into it. So I'm going to bring up the Twitter thread here. Cool. So basically, you start out, you say there's something incredibly fishy going on at Backyard Breaks, pulling multiple product hits out of Panini America specifically. So we're talking about Panini America products. And you mentioned the statistical improbabilities are absurd. Here's a deep dive. And you have a picture there of one of the Logo Man cards. I believe that is is that the Warriors?
I think two of them are there might be a couple there. The one that I think I show on that specific tweet is the LeBron James triple Logo Man, a card that stole a ton of headlines. It's one that Drake was hunting for. A lot of people were going after it. I think it ultimately sold for $2.4 million on Golden. So, we talk about where incentives might be misaligned, and I'm sure we'll get to this later, but when you have people in warehouses packing a $2.4 million card into a $10,000 box, and then there's sort of this expectation that no one's going to say or do anything about it, it definitely creates some misaligned incentives. And I will say too, to sort of lead off, there's not 100% certainty that something is wrong here, and if something is wrong here, there's not 100% certainty to know even who exactly would be at fault, right? So let's pretend that, someone at Panini is potentially, finding the boxes that have the really valuable cards and giving them to someone. Well, that could be one rogue employee. We wouldn't even know if that's, some sort of company-wide tactic. And let's say that Backyard Breaks is receiving these really valuable boxes, and they know they have the ones with the really big hits in them, or they're receiving those. Maybe they don't know they're receiving those, right? Like Panini might just be giving them to Backyard without Backyard's knowledge, right? Like, why would Panini bring Backyard in on that to begin with? So, I think there's a lot to dig into here, but I definitely want to start by sort of level setting and saying, like, while it is my belief that there is something fishy going on here, I'm very hesitant to point fingers at an entire organization or Backyard or any specific one person. There's a lot more to unearth here and discover, but I think what I'm trying to lay out here is there is some problem. To point to exactly who it is right now is tough, but yeah, let's get into it.
That's a fair layout of everything. There's no accusations. It's just, hey, something isn't right here. Something looks suspicious. So let's take a look at it. And I feel like that's a very fair way to start it out. And so we talk about, the thread goes on. You talk about they've hit a lot of hits, a lot of one-of-ones, a lot of Logo Man, a lot of shield patches for the NFL, just a lot. But because there are, especially nowadays, they're printing a lot more cards. There's a lot more one-of-ones. It's not just, you hit the one-of-one. You can have a one-of-one of a specific card, but there could be 10 variations of that card. So what you do, again, I'll give you full credit here. I'm not good at the math, but what you do is you basically say, hey, we're going to look at just 4 cards. And you mentioned earlier they were major hits. You had the LeBron Logo Man. There's also a Warriors triple Logo Man. And then we have two Cade cards, Cade Cunningham. You have the Prism Black, which I would say, we saw the Mac Jones go for, I think, $100,000 earlier this year. That, as far as Prism goes, that is the one-of-one
card,
Prism Black. And then you also have the Cade Cunningham one-of-one Logo Man with the 75 anniversary logo.
And
And
I can even call out really quickly, like why specifically those 4 cards,
Mhm.
right? So something that some people have sort of brought up about the mathematical analysis that I did is that there might be something that's called a survivorship bias, which is a real thing and I think a valid thing for people to point out. An example of that might be like if I just went and looked at, okay, what are the odds that, Backyard hit this random Rudy Gobert card and this, random Brian Dawkins card and this random, whoever other card, right? And then I went and looked, and like you could very easily start to manipulate the numbers and be like, well, based on the ones that they did get, the ones that survived, right? Then you could say, well, there's a statistical improbability that this would happen, and every outcome in cards is sort of very improbable statistically, right? Like the odds that you hit the cards that you hit are very low, even if you just open a few packs. Like you couldn't predict what's going to be in 2 or 3 or 4 packs. So there's some truth to that, but why I would say this is not a survivorship bias is because I literally picked the 4 biggest cards out of the entire product, right? So you have the LeBron James triple logo man. That's a $2.4 million card. You have the Warriors triple logo man, and that one sold, I believe, around $400,000. And then the Cade 1/1 logo man and the Cade Black Prism 1/1. Those 2 are the 2 biggest cards out of National Treasures and Prism, respectively. And someone who really knows the hobby might be like, well, hey, their Cade might have, I don't even know, 6, 7, 8 1/1s in Prism basketball, and you'd be right about that. The difference is, if you're really deep in the hobby, you'll know the true black 1/1 non-autograph is the card of any player to have. Yeah, there's a fast break 1/1, there's a nebula 1/1, there's a black shimmer 1/1, there's all these different variations, but none of them are as valuable as the true black prism. And so, we have this instance where not only did Backyard just happen to pull 4 great cards, they pulled the single 4 best cards out of 3 different products. So that's really where the eyebrows are raised and why I feel like there's not a survivorship bias here. And that's why I chose those 4 cards, is they're the 4 product hits, meaning they're the top single card in that product.
they're not just 4 great cards. They are the 4 cards.
Yeah.
So the next few slides, the next few tweets, you talk about basically what are in the boxes.
Yeah, so Panini does not come out and say how many boxes they made of a certain product, right? When we say product, we mean it's things like Prism, National Treasures, different product lines. They'll make boxes of these products, but they won't say how many they made, right? And so what I did is some of these cards are sequentially numbered, so you know exactly how many of that card are made. And I won't get into all the math because it's sort of boring, but basically the way that I did it is I looked at the cards that exist and then reverse engineered that to come up with a number of boxes that exist. And so, for example, I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but Prism first off the line, which is where the K was pulled from, there's 330 cards in that base set, and there are, in FOTL, you hit 2 shimmers per box, but all the shimmers are numbered, so I know there's 46 per player. So you take 46, which is the number of cards per player, times the number of players in the set, which is 330, and then you divide that by 2 to come up, because there's 2 shimmers per box, to come up with the number of boxes that exist for that product. I think the number was 7,590. I don't have it in front of me. You can double check me there, but basically using that math, you can come up with exactly how many of the boxes exist. You can't do it for every product because not every product has numbered cards. But in this instance, these are really Panini's top 3 most valuable products. A lot of these cards are numbered, so you can reverse engineer and figure out exactly how many boxes exist. And so, yeah, we know exactly how many of the boxes exist for each of these 3 products.
In the next slide, you bring up that we don't know how many boxes Backyard has broken. We don't know how many. I mean, we just don't know. But based on your calculations and statistics of hitting all 4 of those cards, if you want to go basically the probability of it being 0.5%. So what we're looking at here is what are the odds they hit all 4 of these? Yeah. And so even to have a what you said, a 0.5%, so less than 1% chance. So when we talk about just one time, 1 out of 100, just one time, this is less than that. Yeah. Just to have a half of 1% chance in hitting all 4, they would have to open up close to 27% of all the cards.
Yeah, it's a really simple calculation. It's basically just like, so you have that 0.05 is the 0.005 rather is a decimal. It's the, not to get super nerdy on you here, it's the decimal form of the percentage of 0.5%. And then you just take the 4th root of that. So basically what happens is if you take 26% and take that to the fourth power, you're going to get 0.005, which is what that comes out to be. And in layman's terms, what that means is to have a 1 in 200 chance of hitting all 4 of said cards, they would have had to open about 26% of all the product in existence. And so you can already sort of see where this is going, right? Like, we know how much exists. Now we know how much they would have had to open to have a 1 in 200 chance. Okay, so now let's like multiply those together and let's see how crazy that sort of turns out to be, right?
And it's a lot. It's
Yeah.
a lot. It's not just in the number of boxes they would have had to open up, but the value of those boxes.
Yes.
And so it basically breaks down, and I'll try and include the thread with the video here, but it comes out to 27% of the flawless boxes would be over 1,000 flawless boxes, over 5,000 national treasure boxes, and over 2,000 first off the line.
Over 5,000 national treasure boxes is like absurd. Like, that's a big product, right? Like, and to open it's $5,000 a box, right?
Yeah.
So the numbers add up very quick, and you can see where this is going. And it's like, so it was, I think you said 1,125 flawless boxes. Well, I had those at $10,000 a piece, and at some points they were significantly higher, but I try to be conservative in some of my estimates. So that's like 11.25 million of flawless. They needed, I think, somewhere in the vicinity of $25 million worth of national treasures, and then on top of that, there was another 3-something million of Prism FOTL they would have had to open. Almost 2,000 boxes of, actually it was 2,018 boxes of Prism FOTL, which worked out to be another 3 million and change. And so when you add it all up, they would have had to open, this is just wild, over $40 million of those 3 products alone to have a 1 in 200 chance to hit those 4 cards. So, you can very quickly see where this is going. Like, do you think these guys in sort of like a little clubhouse in South Florida did $40 million of these 3 products? It's like very hesitant to say that they did, but even if they did, it's still a 1 in 200 chance. And so, yeah, the numbers here start to paint a very interesting picture.
Even if they did open up $40 million in product, which, hey, that might be possible. $40 million. I mean, if they're breaking, and I know people on Twitter mention, they break all day. Yeah. Okay, well, they don't break national treasure all day. No. They don't break, so you can break all the cards you want all day. Yeah. But I believe you mentioned someone went into your DMs and told you they break about 12 boxes. Yep. Of national treasure day. And so
definitely. And so I'm going to even add to that too, before we touch on that, I'm going to say, like, that's just 3 products, right? Yeah. So and there are dozens and dozens of products for each of the major sports every year. We're talking about 3 single products for, one sport, right? So if they're doing 40 million across those 3, you sort of have to think that, they're doing probably several hundred million of revenue a year. Which, am I going to be the person to sit here and say that's not happening? I'm not going to say that, but, I'd be skeptical to think that they're doing, several $100 million. Do you think Backyard Breaks is like a $300 million company annual revenue, probably worth like $1 billion on the open market? Like, I don't think that's like publicly traded company levels almost, right? Like that's getting to be sort of asinine. And so,
it's definitely not your standard breaker.
Yeah. Now look, crazier things have happened. But just to sort of paint that picture, like that's how much they would need to open and how much revenue they'd need to be doing in order to have a 1 in 200 chance at hitting those cards. And now I think this is where you're headed to, right? So I had a very reputable source who prefers to remain anonymous tell me that Backyard opens up about 12 boxes of national treasures per day. And now national treasures released on July 20th of this year. So that's as of today, that's 86 days ago. That means they would have opened in the vicinity of 1,032 boxes of National Treasures basketball. And so we know that the print run of that product is a little bit over 19,000. And so it works out to, they would have opened just under 5.4% of all the National Treasures basketball product, which, while it's still a ton, and, in that instance, there's about a probably 1 in 19 or so chance that they would hit the Cade. When you start to compound that with the other cards that they hit is where the math really starts to, not look so favorable.
And that's something I just thought of, and it was hit fairly early on as well. So if we're not just talking about, what are the odds they hit it? what are the odds they hit it and they hit it so early?
Particularly for the Cade Black 1 of 1 Prism. I think that one was like in the first couple days of the product being released, they hit that card. And so, yeah, if you sort of stop the clock of how much product they opened right at the time they hit those really big cards, because right now we're sort of, giving Backyard the benefit of all the product they open after they hit the big cards, and still including that in the probability of, how many boxes they opened and what the percent chance would be of hitting those big cards. But yeah, it's another valid point you bring up that it's like I said, I like to be as conservative as possible with these numbers. Like, Flawless, I put at 10,000 a box, but there was a point where that was at 20,000 a box. And if you change that number, well, now they had to open $50 million of product, right? And, there were some other places too, I won't get too nerdy on. There's some other places where I was just trying to be like pretty conservative. And, that's another example, right? Like I didn't go back and try to calculate how long ago did they pull these cards, and then how many boxes had they opened by the time they pulled these cards, and then subtracted so I didn't get into all that either. Really giving a lot of the benefit of the doubt here to even get to the point that we're at, which still does not really look great for the industry, but yeah, that's sort of how we got to those numbers.
Yeah, and so we basically benefit after benefit after benefit, and it still compiles, and it still seems very suspicious.
Yeah.
And so basically it gets down to the 0.5% chance that they got all four of these. They would basically have to have been very lucky if, again, we're assuming everything, all the numbers are right with like the 12 boxes per day.
Yep.
Basically, they either got, and I'll scroll down here, you mentioned, to finish it off here in conclusion, one of three things must be true. Backyard opened $40 million of product and got lucky,
and
1 in 200.
Yep.
Or two, Backyard opened less than $40 million of the product, but got absurdly lucky, meaning that, if you go less than 40 million, the odds of them hitting all four cards would have been 1 in 107.
Yeah, so I can give you really quick how I got to that number, which we just talked about. They opened 5.4% of the National Treasures product, if you assume that the 12 boxes per day figure that I was given is correct. And so if you sort of say, okay, well, what if they opened 5.4% of all the product? In that instance, then there would have been that number you said, about 1 in 117,000 chance of hitting those four cards.
Which is just, again, we're talking about lottery numbers, you know?
Very much so.
And so, again, just it compounds. And so we appreciate you tweeting that out. Basically, the tweet went off on Twitter. I love to see it for the hobby. Yeah. Over 2,000 likes, 243 quote tweets, 558 retweets. And it's not because you're accusing anyone of anything. It's just, hey, here are the facts as I see them. Here are the statistical numbers as I see them. And let's take a further look into this. And so it's nice to not have a, hey, he's doing this or they're doing that. Seems to be a genuine interest in what's going on, which I think is good for the hobby.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I mean, I want to be the last person to make accusations, specifically if there's not 100% certainty on something. And, I'll also say too, like, there's a lot more math and a lot more work to be done here. I could get really nerdy about different ways that people could dig into this and learn more and figure out more. And there's probably things that I did that, maybe aren't 100% accurate, right? Like we said, we're making an estimate on the 1,032 boxes of National Treasures that they opened. And if Backyard comes out and has receipts and says they opened 5,000, that changes things a lot, right? So, very open to like, this was not meant to be, oh, Panini's doing something really bad. Oh, Backyard's doing something really bad. This was meant to be like, hey, there are certainly at minimum some statistical anomalies here that everyone would benefit from there being a deeper investigation into. And it's the last sort of thing that you said on the thread. You said there's option 1 and option 2. I also listed a third option, which is like, there is a chance here, and sort of what we're talking about and what needs to really be investigated is like, is Backyard being fed loaded boxes, right? So let's presume for a second, and this is a presumption, that Backyard is being fed loaded boxes and they are receiving these boxes with the big hits, right? Let's assume that's happening. Well, even if we assume that, that doesn't necessarily mean Backyard's at fault, because Backyard wouldn't have to know that for that to happen, right? So even if they are being fed these boxes, it might not be Backyard's fault at all. And your other assumption might be, oh, well, then Panini's really at fault here, right? Well, it's like, Well, yes and no, right? You could have one rogue employee on the warehouse line who's packing these boxes and marking them and giving them to backyard and not telling anyone, right? And so, just like the McDonald's Monopoly scam way back in the day, like you could have one rogue employee doing something. And, while maybe you could then say, well, Panini should have better oversight, yada, yada, it might not be this like grand scheme from Panini to try and, get these cards in front of the breakers with the biggest audience, right? So, I just want to make sure that it is an assumption to say that that backyard is being fed loaded boxes. Do I think there's a real chance that's happening? Yes, and that's what I want to get into, and that's what this thread was about exploring. But just even if that is happening, that doesn't necessarily mean there's this grand scheme. Now, there also could be a grand scheme, so I don't want to rule that out. But I just want to I don't want to I also don't want to point fingers where there's not enough data to do it yet. But yeah, certainly, excited that you brought me on here to talk about this a little bit more. And I even said it at the end of the thread. Look, if this thing is as big as I think it might be, there's probably a lot of people that know something. So my DMs are open if you know anything, if you have whatever texts or emails or any sort of receipts or know anything about what might be going on here. You have full anonymity. Anyone who wants to tell me anything and doesn't want their name to be out there, I'm happy to oblige with that. So if you know anything, say something. I mean, at the end of the day, I love sports cards as much as anyone. It's been a lifelong passion for me. I jokingly say I have 90% of my net worth in little pictures of men, right? That's I love it. Yep. I love it. I live it and breathe it. And, I ultimately just want this to be a place that is the best for everyone. And right now there's definitely this sense that feels like, some of breaking is unregulated gambling. And there's also this opportunity for it to just be loaded with corruption. When you think about, this is sort of another analogy that I make is imagine there was someone that worked for the lottery, right? And they told that worker who probably doesn't make a ton of money, here's the Powerball numbers, right? 3 days in advance. Now I know it's a theoretical situation. So you can't actually happen, right? But imagine that happens. Right now, then wouldn't the lottery company be absurd to think that the person that they told the Powerball numbers to isn't going to do something about that? And that's exactly what's happening with cards. And there's no regulation and no oversight, right? It seems to me from everything that I understand about these products and the way they're packaged, that there's probably some warehouse workers that are packaging, hand collating, particularly these really high end products. And then they know exactly where the cards are. They probably don't make a lot of money. And there's this expectation that no one's going to say or do anything or slide a box to a friend. It's the first time in the history of the sports card industry where there are cards at release date worth $1 million plus. Even 2-3 years ago, there weren't cards worth 100,000 plus at release date. And so everything that's happened with the modern card industry, it's just, I think there probably at minimum needs to be some regulation and oversight. And I hope this draws attention to that. And at the end of the day, I just want everyone to have a fair chance at these cards, particularly if we're talking about boxes that cost $10,000, $5,000, $3,000 a box. Now imagine there's people that spend their hard-earned money on these things. And now imagine they find out they never had a chance at the big cards to begin with. That just really rubs me the wrong way. And so more than anything, this does not change how I feel about cards. I'm very bullish on the card industry. I love it. I can't get enough of it. If there is something shady going on here, I hope it gets uncovered. I hope it gets figured out. And I think the industry will be better because of it.
And at the end of the day, you're looking out for the little guy. I'm glad you brought up that it could just be one rogue employee. When this kind of thing happens, again, I'm not a math guy, but I like to think of myself as a logic guy. And I have to think, okay, who benefits from what? And so this very easily could be, one rogue employee. It doesn't have to be all of Panini. But as you mentioned, if that is possible, if we see this trend happening, at what point should it be Panini's responsibility to step in and say, hey, listen, this is under our supervision? Obviously, we know, they're not the best at quality control when it comes to the cards.
Yeah.
So, it's probably the same situation. But under the thread, there was another large breaker that was very dismissive of the thread. And so again, going back to, why would they be dismissive of not even accusing another breaker, just asking questions? And so it makes me think, all right, well, if another large breaker is dismissive and just says, hey, they open a ton of product. I keep seeing ton in all caps as if that means anything, where you break down actual numbers and have actual data. And so when I see ton, it bothers me.
Yeah, me too.
but they're very dismissive of it and just say, oh, turn around. There's nothing to see here. Go home. Yeah. And so that makes me think, okay, well, now I'm even more curious. Now I am starting to be, not accusatory, but I'm starting to wonder, you
Suspicious, at
know,
least. Yeah.
yeah. So like what do you have to lose from looking into whether something is appropriate? And so it makes me think, are you doing something similar to what's being, brought up? Or if something like that is happening, do you have something to lose if that is happening, even if you're not a part of it? Maybe, it looks bad on the hobby, and maybe that's a net loss for your company. I'm just looking at, why would they not want just a reasonable inquiry into whether something's going on?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's super valid. And like, this is something too that for me, when I posted this thread, I'm not a betting person, but if I was, I would say, if you made me bet on this, I would say I think there's probably something fishy going on here. I'm not certain, like I said, I'm not certain, but I think it's more likely than not something fishy is going on. When I saw, and I'll sort of say who they are, right? It's Leighton and Blez are two really big breakers in the hobby, some of whom I spend my own money with, right? And so I don't mean to, I'm not throwing darts at these guys. I don't have anything against them, but they both came out extremely, extremely defensive of Backyard when and sometimes they sort of acted like I was attacking them, right? I never even mentioned either of them. I never mentioned Leighton. I never mentioned Blez, and they both came out with their own content that was very accusatory and sort of like painted me in this bad light. And like, truthfully, that if anything, I feel like it had the opposite effect of what they wanted. Like now, I'm sort of suspicious of the whole thing and starting to think about and look at like, okay, well, what really big cards did they get? And okay, well, all right, it turns out that Leighton pulled the Anthony Edwards one-of-one logo man autograph out of Flawless, right? Which is another $300,000 card. And so, okay, well, of the five biggest cards, did all five of them go to these three breakers? Like, I want to look at that now, right? And it's something I wasn't even thinking before they brought this up. But, in my mind, there's only two real reasons for them to try to be very dismissive of this, because you'd think like under normal circumstances they just be like, maybe we think this is real, maybe we don't, but it's worth investigating, let's figure it out, right? The two reasons I think that they would really have the response that they did, and I think both are legitimate possibilities. One is maybe there's some level of them being in on it, and maybe they're being fed boxes too, and maybe this is bigger than just Backyard, which hopefully it's not, and it's very possible that it's not, but hopefully it's not. And I think the other real possibility is I think they could be worried about regulation in the space.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if the government gets involved here and says, hey, this is unregulated gambling. Hey, we need to, we're going to really change the way that this works, right? Well, then all of a sudden, like, these guys are going to get shut down. And so I think they're worried about fraud in any place, because in the event that, let's say that Panini and Backyard are in this together and they're the only two people involved, well, then there's probably going to be government regulation, and that would still crush Leighton. It would crush Blez. So really sort of disappointed with their responses. Like, I like these guys. I think they do good for the hobby in general. It really felt like their responses, they had their opinion made up before they even read my thread, right? Like it was even some of the things they said, it was as if they didn't even like read the full thing or understand it, right? So like one of the things Blez called out, he's like, you had Flawless at 10,000 a box. It's really 20,000 a box. I'm like, that strengthens my argument when you say that, right? Because now they would have had to open 50 million instead of 40 million to have a 1 in 200 chance. So it's like, I was having a little bit of a hard time with some of the things that they said in response and why they said it. But I don't know. It's like, when I posted this thread, I was worried that this might be something big. And now, truthfully, what is it, 8 hours after posting it, having a lot of my DMs, seeing a lot of responses, I'm worried that it might be something even bigger. And so I don't know how it's going to play out. I'm definitely in I'm not going to say too much right now. I'm sort of in like the data accumulation phase. I'm going to talk to a lot of people. I'm going to think about a lot of things. I'm very measured with my words. So, I'm interested to see how it plays out, but definitely even have learned a lot in the last 8 hours. And I think it's going to be that way. And I have a lot of unread DMs right now too, that some of them have some very interesting information. And so, we'll see how that all goes.
Yeah, hopefully most of them are positive to your inquiries. But yeah, you bring up a great point. I think it was an issue when Pokemon became really big in the late 90s. It was, hey, there's like kids buying these cards and you don't know what's in them. And so it is, people could say it is gambling, and you bring up a great point. If all of a sudden the government says, hey, buying sports cards are gambling. I don't know I don't know how it resolved itself in the late 90s. But yeah, that would pretty much shut breakers down.
Yeah, it
Um,
would.
it might be good for casinos. Casinos might be able
Might be
to.
good for Barstool, baby. Come on, let's go.
Yeah, come on down to the come on down to the Barstool Sportsbook and buy a pack of cards.
Yeah.
It's something I didn't think about, but maybe I'll bring it up to Dave.
I'll tell you if that happens, like I'm gonna be at like the Barstool stinking casino every day because I love rip and wax, and it's
Yeah.
a fun part of the hobby. Like you have to do it very responsibly because for the most part, these things have a very negative ROI unless you're very advanced and very expert in picking very, very specific products, normally old releases, and know exactly how to, determine expected value of a product. For the most part, ripping wax is a very negative ROI thing to do, but it's also for someone who can be responsible with it. It's incredibly fun and really an important part of the hobby. So look, hey, if it becomes regulated, I'm going to be Barstool customer number one.
Yeah, absolutely. I can just picture somebody playing blackjack over here while somebody's opening up, some cards. It's very funny. We talked about how it might just be one rogue employee. Even if that was the case, there would have to be somebody on the other end or getting some kind of kickback or something. Even if Panini isn't involved, they have a responsibility to at least look into the distribution. There's already a demand for these cards.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at the Dutch auctions lately, but I imagine like they sell out for the most part, especially the larger boxes. So they don't need to pump anything.
Well, look, I can give you a few reasons that I think,
Okay, perfect.
Let me tell you why it would be in Panini's best interest for these things to happen. So one is these breakers have very big audiences, right? And so when they put these, when the really big cards are hit and a ton of people see it, people start to think that, hey, maybe these things happen with more regularity than they actually do, right? So they start to think, oh, it's not that hard to hit the $2 million card. I'm going to go buy a $10,000 box next time they release something, right? The other part of it too is they could potentially have deals in place with the breakers where they say, hey, you buy X amount of product, we guarantee you this really big card. Right. Mm-hmm. So there's things like that could be happening. And another piece of it, too, I would say is they want these cards to be opened. A lot of product stays sealed. It stays sealed for a really long time. Right. Imagine if no one ever found the LeBron triple logo, man. There wouldn't have been all those articles about it. It wouldn't have been on a billboard in Times Square. It wouldn't have gotten all this press. Panini would have lost out on millions and millions of dollars of press alone. Right. And so they want these cards to be opened. And how do you guarantee that a card is opened? Well, you give it to a breaker, right? Like, and I think,
on video.
Yeah, who has it on video, right? And so I think, you go back to, like, to me, off the top of my head, the last really, really big card that hasn't been found in a Panini product is the 2018 Panini Prism Luka Doncic 1/1 Black Prism rookie card. Like, what if they sat down at a table a year after that and were like, guys, this would have been a $5 million card. We would have gotten absurd amounts of headlines. It would have been insane press. Like, why don't we just have someone open the boxes and make sure we know where it's at, right? Like, it's not beyond comprehension. That's not to say that any of this is happening, but there certainly are some incentives for Panini if you really do think about why they might do something like this.
Just one final thing, somebody mentioned it in the comments, and I thought it was a great point. A great reference point would be to see how much tops and how much upper deck backyard breaks is ripping.
One thing that's really tough about this is, like, these guys do pretty much all their breaks on live stream. And so you go back and look and, like, you don't, like, there's not really a record. You can't go back and watch old breaks too much, right? So I don't know how much of this stuff they're ripping. So for people that watch a lot of their breaks, I'm even, like, relying on some people that, some people who know to tell me. But yeah, it's one of the other interesting pieces about this, right? Like, every card in question has been a Panini card. And these product hits from tops, like, they aren't appearing with the regularity that Panini cards are appearing. And so that's definitely, something of a catalyst there for a conversation. And yeah, I might even just look at, okay, in the last 2 years, the last 2 years of product across all sports. Let's look at the product hit in every product. Now let's see how many of the ones from Panini have appeared, surfaced anywhere. Let's see how many ones from Topps have appeared or surfaced anywhere, right? And it's like, I can say off the top of my head, probably a few big Topps cards that I know haven't been found. And I don't know if I can do the same for Panini. So, it could be happenstance, just the few in my head that I'm thinking of. But if I really look at the numbers and say, hey, 50 out of 50 Panini cards have surfaced and 20 out of 50 tops have surfaced. Well, that would be pretty compelling, I think. So definitely one of the things I plan to look at. But yeah, there's like I said, and you're really bringing this point, to the light. Like there's 100 other things to look at here, and a million different ways that you can split the data up and look at things. So people who have a little bit of an understanding of numbers and Doug's, don't count yourself out, man. I know you say you don't know math that well, but you stuck with this whole thread pretty well and had the numbers down pretty good. But people who know, like, do your own research, dig in, share it, show it on Twitter, show it on Instagram. DM it to me. Show me what you find if you don't want to post it yourself. And if it's compelling enough, I'd be happy to share it for you, right? So, like, I would just say if you know numbers well, like there's a million ways to skin this cat. Don't be afraid to look into things yourself if it's of interest to you.
I completely agree. The more information, the better. Again, no accusations towards anyone or any business.
There's enough suspicion to make you wonder here. And, there is enough sort of evidence that I think it's at least worth really investigating a lot more, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Eric, thank you very much for the thread. Thank you for doing all the math for us. And thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, of course. Thanks for having me. This was really fun. And, I'm excited to see where this all leads. Hopefully it leads to everyone realizing there was just some random statistical anomaly that happened, but I'm worried that won't be the case, but hopefully it might be. So let's see where this ends up.
We'll see. Thanks.